Have you ever felt trapped in a cycle where money never seems to be enough? Have you ever looked at your daily efforts and wondered, why even though I work so hard, nothing changes? Well, that's exactly how Jackson Moore felt. An ordinary man, full of dreams but suffocated by debt and routine. For years he believed that prosperity was a privilege for the few, until the day he discovered something that would change everything, a new way of seeing life, feeling, and attracting what he desired. That's how the law of attraction entered his story, transforming not only his relationship with money, but with destiny itself. This is one of those stories that makes us stop and think, what if the secret to abundance is inside my own mind? A real journey full of twists and turns, faith and discovery, and you'll follow every step of it now. But before we begin, tell me one thing. Are you already subscribed to the channel? If not, please subscribe, like, and comment on where you're listening to this story. This way you'll help more people discover the power within themselves. Now get ready, because what happened to Jackson could very well happen to you. Jackson Moore was the kind of man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Every day he woke up before dawn, caught the same crowded bus, and endured hours at a job that seemed to drain his energy. Bills piled up on the kitchen table, and his salary barely covered the basics. Deep down, he felt he deserved more, but he didn't know how to change that seemingly eternal cycle. There was something in Jackson's eyes, a mixture of weariness and hope. He dreamed of working for himself, of having the freedom to create, of making a living from what he loved. But fear, that old companion, whispered, "What if it doesn't work out?" And so day after day he postponed his plans, believing the time wasn't right yet. Jackson's financial life was like a never-remitting tide. Debts poured in from all sides, and he could barely breathe between bills. Sometimes he'd look at his bank statement and laugh nervously, trying to convince himself it was all temporary. Deep down, he wondered if fate had something better in store for him. The nights were long and his thoughts heavy. He found himself wondering what it would be like to live without this constant feeling of scarcity. The sound of his alarm clock in the morning already stung, a reminder that nothing had changed. Still, something inside him insisted on not giving up a small but living spark. And it was precisely in this mix of exhaustion and hope that something began to stir. An invitation from fate, perhaps a sign, about to cross his path and turn on a light he hadn't even known existed. Jackson grew up hearing that money was difficult, almost impossible to earn honestly. Phrases like "life is hard for the weak" or "money doesn't grow on trees" echoed in his mind like absolute truths. He repeated these beliefs without realizing it, and each time a bill fell behind, he became even more convinced that prosperity was not for him. It was as if an invisible wall separated him from abundance. No matter how hard he worked, the results never changed. He saw colleagues prospering, opening businesses, buying cars, while he remained trapped in the same salary, the same excuses, and the same dull routine. Deep down, he believed he was born to fight, not to win. Jackson's mind was a battleground between the desire to grow and the fear of trying. He dreamed big, but his words betrayed him. He said, "I never get lucky. These things aren't for me." Without realizing it, he was feeding the chains that bound him. And the more he doubted, the more life seemed to prove him right. The limitations weren't just in his pocket, but in his mind. He didn't realize that every thought of scarcity planted a seed that blossomed into lack. And as time passed, the fatigue grew, not just physical, but emotional. It was like swimming against the current, never seeing the other shore. But everything changes when the universe decides to whisper something different. When a new idea, small, almost timid, begins to question those ancient truths. And it was at that precise moment that a spark began to shine in the darkness. Ever since he was a boy, Jackson felt that silent calling, the desire to create something of his own. He admired those who could make a living from their ideas, who turned their passion into a living. But over time he learned to hide this desire. like someone guarding a precious secret the world wouldn't understand. After all, who did he think he was to dream so big? The days flew by with tasks, meetings and bills, and the dream remained there forgotten in a corner of his heart. Sometimes it would suddenly appear in the middle of traffic or while drinking coffee, like a nagging reminder that something inside him wanted more. But soon reason would arrive with its harsh voice, saying, "Not now, be realistic." With each new attempt to plan his own business, Jackson hit a wall called fear. Fear of failure, of losing what little he had, of being judged for trying and failing. So he did what he always did, put off his dream, believing that one day, perhaps, circumstances would be more favorable. But time passed, and that later never arrived. The feeling of living a borrowed life gnawed at him, as if something were out of place. It was a void that steady work, a steady paycheck, and small distractions couldn't fill, until one day, between one thought and another, Jackson realized that the desire hadn't died, it had just gone to sleep. And perhaps it was about to awaken in a way he never imagined. Life sometimes has a curious way of shaking us when we pretend not to hear its warning. That's how it was for Jackson. One ordinary morning, he received the news that he was being laid off. The company's cost-cutting had taken him by surprise. The ground dropped out from under his feet. Suddenly, everything he feared most was right there in front of him. Unemployment, overdue bills, an eaten future. For the first few days, he tried to remain calm, but anxiety was like a shadow following him. The nights grew long, the silence in the house weighed heavily, and his thoughts tangled with regret and doubt. He asked himself, why me? Why now? It felt like the end, but what he didn't yet know was that this end would be the beginning of everything. Unemployed and with rent due, Jackson began selling what he could. His car, some furniture, even the antique guitar he loved so much. Each sale hurt, as if a piece of his history had been taken with it. But curiously, amidst the losses, a strange clarity began to dawn. It was during a sleepless night that something changed. Tired of feeling like a victim, he looked up at the ceiling and thought, if all this is happening, maybe there's a reason. It was the first time he opened himself to the possibility that life might be trying to teach him something bigger than the momentary pain. And as if the universe had been waiting for just that moment of surrender, a new, almost imperceptible idea began to blossom within him. Something that would take him down a completely different path. One afternoon, while searching for jobs online, Jackson came across a suggested video, How the Law of Attraction Can Change Your Life. On impulse, he clicked. At first, he thought it was another one of those empty promises. But something about the narrator's delivery piqued his curiosity. It was as if the words were directed at him, as if the universe were in fact trying to tell him something. In the following days, he began researching further. He discovered stories of ordinary people who had transformed their realities simply by changing their mindset. He wondered if it was possible, if thoughts really had power. Doubt haunted him, but with it came a thin but resilient thread of hope. Jackson began to observe his own thoughts. He noticed how often he repeated negative phrases, how often he put himself down without realizing it. It was as if his mind had been programmed to see the worst-case scenario in everything. This realization in itself felt like a first step, small but powerful. One night, while rereading notes on the subject, a phrase struck him like a lightning bolt. "You create what you believe." It echoed in his head, like a mantra he could no longer ignore. For the first time, Jackson felt that perhaps there was something bigger guiding his journey, and without really understanding why, he decided to try. A simple experiment, like someone who gives the improbable a chance, and he has no idea how much this choice would change his life. At first, Jackson laughed at himself as he tried to apply what he learned, sitting around and imagining prosperity. It seemed like a joke. He came from a practical life, where hard work was the only legitimate path to success. This positive thinking sounded like wishful thinking, but still, something inside him insisted, what if it works? In the early days, his mind wouldn't cooperate. With every attempt to envision a better future, memories of failures, debts, and broken promises surfaced. It was hard to believe in abundance when his wallet screamed scarcity. He found himself laughing awkwardly when he said out loud, "I am prosperous." It sounded strange, almost like a lie. Still, Jackson pressed on. He read, listened to lectures, tried to understand how to adjust his thinking. At times he felt angry. If it were that easy, everyone would be rich, he would mutter. But there was something intriguing about this resistance. As if, deep down, he knew he was fighting against his own beliefs. Over time, he realized it wasn't about pretending everything was fine, but about changing the way he reacted to his experiences. It was a daily, silent, internal practice. With each new thought that arose, he asked himself, is this bringing me closer or further away from what I want? And it was in this back and forth of doubts and discoveries that the transformation began to take shape. Still imperceptible, but already in motion, ready to show that the impossible perhaps just needed a little more faith. One day, Jackson woke up different. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a strong urge to change for real. He looked in the mirror and for the first time saw someone tired of surviving and ready to live. He grabbed an old notebook, wrote "My New Reality" at the top of the page, and with a trembling hand began to describe what he wanted his life to be like from then on. He decided that from that moment on, he would no longer be a spectator in his own story. He closed his eyes and visualized a version of himself smiling free, the owner of his own business. He imagined the details, the smell of coffee in the office, the sound of conversations with clients, the feeling of accomplishment. And as he wrote, something inside him seemed to awaken. Jackson realized that believing wasn't a magical act, but a choice, and he was willing to choose faith. Faith in himself, in the universe, and in the possibilities he couldn't yet see. It was like lighting a candle in a dark room. The light didn't eliminate fear, but it showed the way. Over the next few days, he began repeating short affirmations every morning. I am worthy of prosperity. I create my reality. I attract opportunities. At first it sounded rote, but over time, the words began to carry weight, to vibrate different. And so it was, with pens, dreams, and courage, that Jackson took the first step. A symbolic but powerful step. The kind of step that changes the course of an entire life, even before the results appear. In the days that followed, Jackson began to see life with new eyes. He discovered that gratitude was more than just saying thank you. It was a way to shift his perspective on the world. He started small, giving thanks for the roof over his head, the hot coffee in the morning, his health, and even the hardships, which he now saw as less. Every night before bed, he wrote in his notebook 3 things he was grateful for. At first it seemed like a simple, almost naive ritual, but something curious happened. The more he gave thanks, the more reasons he found to be grateful. It was as if the universe responded silently, making room for good things to enter. Gradually his worries gave way to a kind of peace he'd never felt before. It wasn't that the problems had disappeared. The bills were still there, but the way he reacted to them had changed. Jackson began to understand that true abundance begins when the heart feels full, even before the wallet catches up. Gratitude became a refuge amidst the chaos. Instead of complaining about what he lacked, he began to celebrate what he had. It was a subtle but transformative shift. Each word written in the notebook seemed to plant an invisible seed of prosperity in his path. And it was precisely in this state of quiet contentment that the unexpected began to happen. Small coincidences, signs and encounters that seemed to be leading Jackson towards something greater. One morning, Jackson decided to take his practice a step further. He sat quietly, took a deep breath, and began to imagine, in rich detail, the life he so desired. He pictured himself walking into his own office, smelling the new wood furniture, hearing the sound of his clients' happy voices, and in his chest, the quiet pride of a winner. At first it was difficult to stay focused. His mind kept reminding him of his debts, his overdue bills, his uncertainties, but he learned not to fight his thoughts, just let them pass by, like clouds. He returned to the mental scene and tried to feel as realistically as possible the taste of the prosperity he didn't yet have, but could already imagine. Every day he repeated the same ritual, sometimes with his eyes closed, other times writing everything down as if it were a movie script. The more he practiced, the more real it felt. He began to notice small changes, a better mood, more motivation, more ideas. Life seemed to respond to the new energy pattern he emanated. Visualization became Jackson's refuge, a space where the impossible ceased to exist. It was there, in that mental world full of colors and sensations, that he learned to believe again. Each scene he created was like a rehearsal for the future, and he rehearsed it with increasing emotion. And then, without realizing it, this practice began to spill over into the real world. Small opportunities began to appear, and the line between dream and reality slowly began to blur. As the days passed, something in Jackson began to change. He no longer woke up with that heaviness on his chest, nor did he see himself as a victim of circumstance. It was as if he had tuned into a different station, a frequency where things flowed more smoothly. Even the sound of rain on the window seemed different, more beautiful, more purposeful. Negative thoughts still surfaced, but now he knew how to acknowledge them without letting them overwhelm him. When his mind tried to pull him back into fear, Jackson would take a deep breath and remind himself, everything is falling into place. This simple phrase helped him find his balance, even when nothing seemed to make sense. He began to notice subtle signs around him, kind people crossing his path, small opportunities appearing, conversations that seemed like answers to questions he hadn't even asked. The external world reflected what was emerging within him, a new vibration. This change wasn't visible to everyone, but Jackson felt it. He could feel it in the way he slept better, the way he spoke with more enthusiasm, the calmer heartbeat he felt in the face of uncertainty. It was as if the universe was silently saying, now we're on the same wavelength. And it was exactly in this state of lightness and confidence that the first great sign appeared, something he would never have imagined, but which would mark the true beginning of the turnaround. One day, while walking down the street, Jackson had an idea that came out of nowhere, or perhaps out of nowhere. It was simple, yet unique, to create small, personalized products that carried positive messages. It made sense because it combined his entrepreneurial drive with the energy he'd been cultivating. Without thinking much, he wrote it all down on crumpled paper and felt his heart pound. Back home, he spent the entire afternoon researching ways to start small. He discovered he could sell online, make to order, and promote on social media. It was as if his mind was suddenly full of possibilities. He didn't know exactly how it would work, but for the first time, he wasn't worried about the how, only the why. Jackson realized these ideas came to him in his calmest moments, when he was in tune with his feelings. They weren't forced plans, but gentle intuitions that seemed to push him forward. And every time he followed one, something good happened. A sale, a compliment, a new contact. He began to act with more confidence. Even without having all the answers, he recorded videos, made posts, and talked to people. Each step seemed guided by something greater, as if the universe were collaborating. And little by little, life, which had previously seemed stagnant, began to move forward. These small actions, so simple and spontaneous, opened doors Jackson didn't even know existed. And in one of them, something special awaited him, an encounter that would completely change the course of his journey. The following weeks were filled with curious events. Jackson began to notice too many coincidences to be mere chance. Once he ran into an old schoolmate who, coincidentally worked in design and offered to help him with the visual identity of his products. "I can't believe I ran into you today," they both laughed, little imagining how much that reunion would change everything. Soon after, a satisfied customer posted a photo of one of the products on social media, and the post went viral. Jackson was surprised by the number of messages he began receiving. It was as if the universe had given him a little push, aligning the pieces so that the business could grow naturally. He began to see these synchronicities as signs, reminders that he was on the right path. Every encounter, every word, every event seemed to have a hidden purpose. It was as if the world around him spoke to him through its details. With each passing day, his confidence grew. He no longer needed to force things to happen. He simply had to be open to receiving them. And the more open he became, the more opportunities arose, coming from unexpected places. It was in this state of fluidity and enchantment that Jackson found himself at a new crossroads, a choice that would test his faith in the process and show whether he truly believed in the power of attraction. Jackson's growth seemed like a dream, but like every dream, it also brought its trials. With more orders coming in, he began to feel the pressure mounting. Expenses mounted, inventory was delayed, and suddenly that feeling of dread, the very one he thought he'd conquered, resurfaced. "What if it all falls apart again?" whispered the ancient voice in his mind. For days, he struggled with thoughts of insecurity. His head whirled with worries, bills to pay, impatient clients, the fear of disappointing. At night, sleep eluded him, and Jackson found himself revisiting the same mistakes as before, as if the past had returned to test him. It was a painful reminder that changing from within required perseverance. He realized that the law of attraction didn't free him from challenges. It taught him to face them with a different energy. Still, at that moment, faith seemed distant. Emotional exhaustion made everything seem heavy, and doubts once again echoed louder than confidence. One silent morning, sitting at the kitchen table, Jackson looked at the notebook where he'd jotted down his gratitudes. The old pages were filled with dreams come true. As he flipped through them, a tear fell, not of sadness, but of remembrance. He'd come too far to give up now. And it was in this mixture of fragility and courage that he decided to get up once more, willing to rediscover the strength he knew still lived within him, even if he had to search for it in the dark. The next morning, Jackson woke up with puffy eyes, but a lighter heart. He realized that true faith isn't the kind that exists when everything goes right, but the kind that keeps you standing when the ground seems to disappear. So he took a deep breath and decided to trust again, not just in the universe, but in himself. It was time to practice what he'd been learning. She returned to her visualization routine, resumed her gratitude journal, and promised herself that this time she wouldn't let fear steal her energy. Each challenge would be a training session, an opportunity to prove to herself that she could remain steadfast, even in the face of storms. It was strange how, just by changing her posture, things began to seem more possible. Jackson began to understand that the law of attraction wasn't about controlling the world, but about controlling what he emanated. He learned to see obstacles as invitations, reminders that he was growing. And when he stopped despairing, solutions began to appear, almost naturally. He found himself surrounded by people willing to help, understanding clients, and ideas that blossomed at just the right moments. It seemed like magic, but now he knew it was harmony. It was a reflection of the faith and persistence that even in the darkest hours, he insisted on maintaining. And it was in this state of renewal that Jackson began to take even greater steps, ready to transform not only his mind, but the entire reality around him. Over time, Jackson realized that his mind was like a garden, and that for years he had been planting seeds of fear and scarcity without realizing it. Now he decided to replant everything. He wrote, in a new notebook, phrases that contradicted what he had heard all his life. "I deserve to prosper. Money is my ally. Abundance flows to me easily." He repeated these words every day until they began to sound natural. At first, it felt forced, as if he were trying to trick his own brain. But little by little, something shifted within him. Each statement served as an antidote to the old beliefs that still tried to resurface. It was as if each word healed an old wound, a reminder that he wasn't good enough, or that success was the privilege of others. The mind, once his greatest enemy, began to become his partner. Jackson learned to observe what he thought, to question ideas he had previously accepted without resistance. "Can't I really do it?" he asked himself, and the more he doubted the impossible, the more life opened up. Those around him began to notice the change. The way he spoke, the sparkle in his eyes, even his tone of voice, everything seemed more confident. Jackson wasn't just learning to think differently, he was learning to be different, and that he discovered was true power. It was at this point that something extraordinary happened, an unexpected leap that would show how much stronger his new beliefs were than he ever imagined. Jackson felt the moment had arrived. That idea, which had been maturing for months, no longer fit into plans and notes. It needed to come to life. With his heart racing, he decided to officially open his own business. He didn't have everything he wanted, but he had enough courage, purpose, and a quiet trust that the universe would sustain him. He invested what little he had in materials, created a simple website, and began advertising. In the early days, almost no one bought anything, but Jackson remained focused. Instead of despairing, he chose to believe. Every morning, before starting work, he would close his eyes and whisper to himself, "Everything is moving in my favor." And somehow, it was. Things began to happen slowly, but surely. One client referred another. A compliment turned into a new order, and what was just a dream began to become reality. Each small victory felt like confirmation that he was on the right track. Jackson didn't know what the future held, but he felt a lightness he'd never felt before. He was no longer driven by the fear of loss, but by the joy of creating. The leap of faith had taught him something powerful, that true success begins the moment the mind believes before seeing. And from that moment on, doors began to open, with more force, revealing opportunities he never would have imagined finding on his own. Jackson's first victories came quietly, but filled with meaning. A message from an emotional client, an unexpected compliment, a larger-than-expected sale, small tokens, but to him they felt like trophies. Each achievement was accompanied by a deep sense of gratitude and the certainty that all the hard work was worth it. He remembered the sleepless nights, the doubts, the fears, and now he saw results beginning to blossom before his eyes. The business, which had begun tentatively, was beginning to take on a life of its own. Orders were increasing, and Jackson found himself surrounded by people who believed in his vision as much as he believed in it. The most curious thing was to notice how prosperity arrived so gently, without desperation, without rushing. Opportunities seemed to align at just the right time, as if someone, up above, were orchestrating everything. With each new achievement, he silently gave thanks, not only for the money, but for the transformation that came with it. Mornings were different now. Jackson woke with excitement, feeling part of something bigger. The fear that had once gripped him had given way to a calm confidence, a kind of peace that didn't depend on his bank balance. He knew this was just the beginning, and as the business grew, a new question began to arise in his heart. How far could he go if he kept believing? Jackson's success began to multiply like ripples on a still lake. What was once just a small home-based business became a recognized brand, with orders coming from other cities. He could hardly believe it when he saw his company's name mentioned in publications and recommendations. It was like watching his own faith take shape before his eyes. The right connections kept appearing. Partnerships appeared almost magically, and each person who crossed his path seemed to play a specific role in his expansion. Jackson learned that when the mind vibrates with abundance, the universe responds with generosity, and sometimes even a touch of humor. The work grew, But what was most impressive was what was happening inside him. His self-confidence, once fragile, became solid. His worries faded, and he no longer saw challenges as enemies, but as signs that he was leveling up. It was the famous domino effect. When one area transforms, everything else follows. With each achievement, Jackson remembered where he came from. This kept him grounded and his heart grateful. He knew the key was to maintain the vibration, to continue emanating the same faith that had brought him this far. And it was in this rhythm of expansion and purpose that something even greater began to form, something that would show Jackson that prosperity goes far beyond money. Over time, Jackson realized that the true transformation wasn't just in what he had achieved, but in who he had become. Money brought comfort, of course, but what truly surprised him was the serenity he felt inside. He no longer lived in fear of tomorrow. He learned to trust the flow of life, and this left him lighter, more whole. People began to notice this change. Friends said he seemed different, more peaceful, more present. Jackson smiled because he knew it wasn't just appearance, it was the reflection of a healed mind, a heart at peace. He had learned that thriving is more about being than having. Her gratitude and visualization practices remained steadfast, not as obligations but as natural habits. Each day became a new opportunity to further expand her awareness of abundance. It was as if the universe continued to teach her through the little things. Jackson began to inspire others. He shared his story, helped those who still doubted, and showed that the power of the mind is real. He now understood that the ultimate purpose of prosperity is to multiply it, not just in possessions, but in hope. And at this point in the journey, fate seemed to have one last surprise in store, something that would show in a poetic and unexpected way how the universe rewards those who learn to believe. One sunny afternoon, Jackson received a message that made him pause for a moment. It was from a young man who had followed his journey on social media. He said that thanks to Jackson's story, he had decided to change his mindset and was now starting his own business. Jackson read those words and felt tears well up in his eyes. He realized, in that moment, that his success had overflowed. He understood that the law of attraction had not only transformed his financial life, but had also made him a channel of inspiration. Everything he had experienced, the failures, the fears, the nights of doubt, now made sense. Each challenge had been a preparation, a stepping stone that led him to that moment of fulfillment. Looking back, he saw the distance between the man who woke up discouraged every day and the one who now awoke with gratitude. The journey had shaped him, taught him that faith is the bridge between the invisible and the real. The universe, after all, had always been listening. It just waited for him to truly believe. Jackson smiled. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with golden hues. He took a deep breath and silently gave thanks, not for what he had achieved, but for who he had become. He knew this story had no end. It was just the beginning of a new cycle of abundance. And as the gentle wind blew through the window, Jackson thought that perhaps the greatest miracle of the law of attraction is this: transforming ordinary people into conscious creators of their own realities. And that's how Jackson Moore discovered what life had always tried to teach him, that true prosperity doesn't begin in the wallet, but in the mind. He understood that everything changes when we change from within, when we decide to believe, be grateful, and take action, even without having all the answers. His story is living proof that the universe responds to the energy we send. Jackson not only achieved financial success, but also an inner peace that money alone could never bring. And perhaps, deep down, this is the true meaning of the law of attraction, transforming scarcity into faith and faith into reality. If you've made it this far, remember there are no coincidences. Maybe this story crossed your path for a reason. So the next time doubt strikes, close your eyes and say to yourself, I am capable. I deserve it. I can do it. And if this message touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like it. This way, You'll continue receiving stories that inspire and strengthen your journey toward prosperity. Because in the end, the greatest wealth we can attract is to believe in the power that lives within.